Hey everyone, thanks again for joining us here today. I'm your host, Jared Taylor. We have a very special guest today. We have a partner at Bain Capital Ventures joining us, Aaref Hilaly. Aaref, how's it going?
It's going well, thanks. It's really great to be here with you.
Excited to have you on. Let's dive right in. We'll spend a little time just on your background, but I don't want to spend too much time. I feel like a lot of people have heard, or if they haven't heard, they should go check out and learn more about you because you have a really great background. But I would like for our conversation today, obviously, to focus around all things AI. So specifically, you had early success with two exits when you were running companies. I would love to hear how your early experiences with companies CenterRun and Clearwell Systems helped shape your perspective as a venture capitalist, especially when assessing AI companies.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the things that I carry with me from my entrepreneurial experience when I talk to founders now, number one is just tremendous empathy for what they're going through, because it always sounds improbable. It always sounds really hard. But specifically with AI, I think there are just so many open questions around what these businesses become in future that are just impossible to answer right now, because the whole landscape is shifting. And when I started my companies, it was similar. We were going through this transition from on-premise to the cloud, and there were all these questions that I couldn't answer when I was trying to raise money for my seed and my Series A. And so that's what I really kind of keep in mind, is that there are just things early on that are just not going to be clear. And so when I'm looking at companies, I think much more about the team, and have they thought through everything that they can focus on, and what's the quality of the product and the initial wedge, and where could that lead? And I worry a bit less about having certainty around, gross margins or some of the other stuff that's just hard to know.
And specifically, these are interesting times that we're in right now, right? With you look at the conversation around AI last year, and now you look at it this year, only a year
Yeah.
later, and it's getting pretty crazy. And then it'll be interesting to see how things continue to progress heading into the Human X event in right around springtime of 2025. What how are you evaluating these AI companies?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say it's a great time to start a company, because so much is changing, and very little of it is predictable. I mean, if you think back a year, everyone was an OpenAI maxi and saying there's going to be one model that'll be ahead of others. Today, open weight models are very much keeping up, and we're clearly in a multimodal world. And that's just one example of something where thinking has shifted that creates these opportunities for entrepreneurs. When I evaluate a company, um, I guess I'm really looking just at two things. Have they Does this company have an initial wedge? I focus on early stage seed and Series A. Most AI companies today, I feel, most Gen AI companies are at that stage, just given how immature and young the technology is. And so I'm looking at, is there a foothold in the market? Has this team kind of seen something that others haven't, that enabling it to solve either a problem today or an emerging problem that just give it a foothold to get going, a wedge, if you like, and how well have they thought that through? And do they have the imagination to think about where that could lead? And so that's one main thing that I look at. And then the second thing is really the team, because anyone we back today, I would fully expect the business to evolve and change massively over the next. We invest from a long-term perspective for 5, 10 years, and so you look at the person and you say, can this person grow with the opportunity? Do they have not just the tenacity and the grit to stick with it, but also just the imagination to imagine what it could be, and move with the company as it grows? And so those are really the main things that I look at. And just given how much is shifting around in AI, I'd say that there's a stronger focus on those things over other things that might apply for other businesses.
What like word of caution do you give to your founders? Like in terms of advice, I know there's always the encouragement, but how do you help them navigate kind of the landmines?
Um, I mean, I think it's golf, not football, meaning play your own game and focus on what you're doing and be excellent, stay true to your North Star that you think you're aiming for. It's not a competition with somebody else. And so if there's hype around someone else and they're doing something or they've raised a lot of money, you have to just screen out that noise because ultimately that doesn't matter.
Are there any particular industries that you think are the most ripe for AI adoption?
Um, you know, what I've seen so far, I mean, there are a ton of industries. The industries I think that have been the early adopters, where it is a total no-brainer, have been industries where there's a lot of information and human beings have to kind of like process that to produce some specific output that people understand. So if you're a doctor, then when you meet a patient, you have to get a SOAP note, what's called a SOAP note, into your EHR. There are a bunch of companies doing that. If you're a paralegal, you've got to create a demand letter if you're in the personal injury space or something else. And there's one of our companies even up that does that. If you're for each of these, if you're an SDR, you've got to produce leads, and there are a bunch of companies that do that. So I feel like we're at a stage where the technology is really good at analyzing information and freeing people from doing this fairly low-level kind of grungy work that they'd prefer not to do. So any industry, law, insurance, healthcare, tons of industries like that where AI is having a big impact today.
What's something that you're really looking at where, like, are there any particular things regarding regulations, or just what the future hold? Like, what could, I don't want to focus on what goes on because what could go wrong, because that's a negative. I don't want to focus on the negative here, but what are you really staying on top of the most within this space? And what should other founders and maybe investors also be aware of? I guess this is the what keeps you up at night question, is a long way of
Yeah,
asking.
I mean, what keeps me up at night is when I'm up at night is with excitement, not dread. And so I'm focused more on how the technology is evolving and the opportunities that creates rather than the regulatory side. I feel like regulation will catch up over time in a way that makes sense, but isn't and shouldn't be the focus right now. And so on the technical side, I mean, there are just new things coming up every day. Two big areas that I think are particularly promising. One is multimodal, where models now are not just text, but can also incorporate images and video. And that just opens up a whole new universe of potential applications. And that's happening right now. And so it's something very much top of mind. The second one is what are called agents, but really is just the ability to reason intelligently, which hasn't really happened so far, but we're making progress, and there are a couple of interesting avenues, and you can imagine over the next couple of years that making huge advances. And so that's the other area, or another area that I think is tremendously exciting. And so those are the things that I'm thinking about. And when we engage with young companies, we think about, okay, if we roll the clock forward in a couple of years, and they can take advantage of these trends, what becomes possible?
And let's talk about some of those companies that you have backed. One of which is a company called, I'll give you, we want to kind of go into three here, which would be nice, but one of them is Contextual AI. So can you give our audience, for those that haven't heard of Contextual AI, a quick snapshot of what the company does, and then, how do you see them becoming a market leader?
Yeah, sure. So Contextual AI is an enterprise platform for LLMs, meaning that they help companies build applications using LLMs by giving them a really simple platform and different applications that work on that platform for different things like customer support or whatever it is they want to do. We have, I'm at Bain Capital Ventures. We have what we call BCV Labs, which is a technical community of 300 to 400 different kind of people building in and around AI. And I'd certainly encourage people listening, if you're interested, to go to BCV Labs and on the web and sign up if you're interested in any of our events or our fellowships or anything else we're doing. One thing we do are a series of incubations. Contextual was one of the early companies that came through that, where the founders did some of the seminal work on RAG, and as they left Hugging Face and had previously worked at FAIR, Facebook AI Research, we worked with them to try and support them right from inception, so that over the last 18 months, I mean, thanks to them, they've made tremendous progress and have, in a short period of time, recruited a great team of about 20, 30 people, signed a handful of customers, got revenue, production deployments. And the thing I think that stands out, and the premise of Contextual, is that tightly integrating all the components of an AI system, the model and the embeddings and what have you, you get a better result that's more efficient, quicker, serves the enterprise use case much better, and is much easier to get up and running. And so think of it like an iPhone versus Android and what have you. In the early days, people really valued the simplicity of the iPhone, and that's what Contextual is for enterprise AI.
I love it. Great explanation. And it sounds like whenever you can get in super early with those teams, like is obviously you are an early stage fund. How important is it for you to get in front of these companies as early as possible to also help them? Like, are you also helping them shape the team, or do you try to be more, hands off, I guess?
We try to actively support the founders. So, I don't want to overstate it. The founders are doing the hard part. They're creating everything. They're doing the hard work. Just by virtue of all our partners have operating experience. And so we try to support them, with whatever, recruits and customer introductions and advice on how to build the company, just to help founders go more quickly. And so that's what we've tried to do at Contextual and Clean Lab and other companies.
Glad you mentioned Clean Lab because that was the next company I was going to ask you about. So would love to hear about Clean Lab, and then really how you identified Clean Lab's approach as a game changer, and what maybe future applications are you most excited about as a result. So I'll let you kind of give the quick intro to Clean Lab, and then we can talk more about it.
Yeah, sure. So Clean Lab, three brilliant founders, PhDs from MIT, building a company based off their research and an open source project that came out of it. Clean Lab started as a way to improve the quality of your label data for AI being computer vision type applications. It's now also evolved from that to also include data curation for LLMs and improving the quality of data that goes into LLMs, often for RAG-based applications. And so that's kind of what it does. And it's kind of, I think, addressing one of the biggest problems in AI, which is that, you may have powerful models that you can leverage, but it's very hard to get the data in a format and kind of organized in a way that the model can take advantage of it. And that's what it's helping with.
And how did you first come across this company?
That's a good question. Well, so I was introduced to the founder by a mutual friend who's their lawyer. And, this was during COVID. So a lot of the time I spoke to him over Zoom, and then I met some of the co-founders one of the co-founders based here, Jonas. I mean, we were just blown away by the intellect and energy of these guys. And it's a crowded space, but they had a differentiated approach built off that open source project. And just to what I was saying earlier, that combination of grit and vision to really build, we felt, a substantial company. And so we led the seed round in that case, and then we've had wonderful partners from Menlo and TQ Ventures come in as part of the Series A.
When you look back, isn't it really interesting to see, like, when you were starting, your first few companies and the fundraising process, and what I'm sure probably most of the meetings were in person.
Yep.
Right?
And people used to, I mean, when I was starting up, yeah, absolutely. Everything was in person. And then even when I was working in venture 5-10 years ago, people would drive to Sand Hill Road and we'd have a 1 hour long meeting. Today, everything moves more quickly. And I think it's actually much better for founders. Shorter, snappier meetings over Zoom to figure out initially, is there a fit on both sides, means everyone can meet more companies. And then, but the fundamentals haven't changed, meaning that ultimately when a founder decides on who to work with as their venture partner, especially at the early stage, at seed or Series A, I really think it's a recruiting decision where they need to decide, who do I believe will help me build this company? Who will help me realize the founder's full potential? Because that's the biggest driver of company outcome. And for that, you have to spend time together in person. So I think the process today is actually much better for everyone.
Yeah, in the past, on both ends, you could have the founder feel like maybe their time, if there wasn't a fit, that they spent all this time commuting or going, and same thing with the VC, right? That they were spending
Yep.
this extra time. So that's allowed you to also have a lot more conversations with companies. And does it also help you make decisions faster as well?
Well, I think everyone has to make decisions faster because the world has just sped up in the last 10 years. So there's no more of this kind of like, okay, everyone needs to wait for a Monday partner meeting. I think everything moves more quickly today.
I do want to give you a chance to, because I know this is one of the other companies we wanted to go into and talk a little bit about. So one of your portfolio companies, Even Up. If you could tell us more about that company and why you invested.
Yeah, sure. So even up, so contextual is an kind of platform, and Clean Lab is infrastructure. Even up is an application, so higher up the stack. Uh, it's it it's an application for personal injury lawyers that basically automates their workflow, starting with the demand letter, which is the thing that they send out to clients, and then moving up from that, kind of creates medical chronologies and other things that they care about. So very much a vertical application. You don't care about this unless you're a personal injury attorney. What's so interesting about this business is that it existed before, but has been massively accelerated by Gen AI. Gen AI was kind of like the final missing piece that enabled them to fully automate the process that they were focused on, and that led to a dramatic acceleration in the business. And so this is one where I met the founder very early when he was raising seed. And we didn't actually, and shame on us, have the foresight to invest at that time, but we were just so impressed with him that we tried to help him at that stage. We kept in touch. And then thanks to one of my partners, Sarah, who works with the company, we re-engaged and invested in a couple of later rounds, and now are thrilled that the company has just blossomed and is now at a fairly mature stage, growing very quickly. So I think for me is kind of like another example where it really helps to meet a company early on, even if we don't invest, and then we kind of can keep in touch. And if it makes sense to invest a little later, we'll do that.
For advice to the founder in that situation, because that happens a lot, right? Where a founder meets with a firm and it's just not a fit at that time, perhaps, right?
Yeah.
So what advice would you give the founders? Because obviously it seems like this has happened, not just once, but maybe a couple times on your end where you pass the first time, but you come back. So what can the founder do to, obviously, if you're meeting with them, there is general interest to continue to stay in touch with you? Are they putting you on their update emails? Are you
Yeah.
asking them questions?
I think when a founder raises a round, they should say to themselves, this isn't the last time that I'm going to raise money. Of the people that I've met in this process, who did I click with and who did I like? And then just keep in touch with those people. It's not like a high time commitment, but sure, put them on the investor updates, meet them every few months, keep them up to date. And then the founder learns more about that person and really gets to know them better. And that person gets to know the company better. And then, if stars align, then things naturally develop from there. So I think it's a smart move to not just raise for the current round, but also be thinking about next time and who you'd like to recruit for next time.
As we start to wrap up here, I did have another question I wanted to ask you around something you said earlier. You were talking about kind of healthcare and AI's role in the workflows. I would love to see, how do you foresee AI's role in creating more patient-centered healthcare experiences without necessarily overhauling the whole existing system? Because that's everyone seems to go with, let's overhaul the whole system, but that's not the the over.
You're totally right. You're totally right. I feel like Silicon Valley's approach historically to messed up sectors of the economy or inefficient sectors of the economy, whether it's healthcare or government services or education, has been to tell them, guys, you're doing it all wrong. Change everything you're doing. Here's technology that does it way better. And the response of people in that industry is kind of like, yeah, thanks guys, forget about it. We're doing it our way. I think the difference with AI is that now tech can go to these industries and say, keep doing what you're doing. So you don't really have to change. We'll just put a layer on top of you so that for the end user, for the consumer, they have a much better experience. So if you think of any time you've had to sit on hold, or you've had to fill out kind of like a 10-page form, or you've had to sign stuff with 50 pages of legalese and you have no idea what you're even signing, but you have to get a service. I feel like this happens all the time in healthcare and government services and certain sectors of the economy. All of that can now be taken care of by AI, and the consumer can have a magically better experience where they just, interacting in either a chat format or some other modality, can give the information needed, understand what's being asked of them, without asking the existing providers of healthcare to change what they're doing, which is difficult for a bunch of reasons. So that layer in between the industry itself working as usual and the consumer that AI can fill and create is just tremendously exciting, and I think has a much higher chance of success than what we were doing before.
Yeah, it's always funny when you hear the overhaul the host. That not
Yeah.
to say that doesn't work in other industries, but in healthcare, it's one of the quickest ways to get the leadership to not be too excited about you. I moderated a panel with someone from Tampa General Hospital recently, and we were just kind of talking about just the conversations that come up when you're pitching. He was also mentioning how a couple years ago, health systems were so open to all these different pilots, and now if the ROI is not clear, right, they're not even
Yeah.
engaging in it. So I guess how do you advise maybe founders to get out of their own way when you hear that type of pitch, or when you hear we're going to overhaul the host system? Does that worry you in healthcare and say this probably isn't for us then?
Well, it does worry me a bit, yeah. And I'd say not just healthcare, but particularly regulated sectors. Anyone who has to answer to a regulator, it's much harder for them to change. So it's financial services, it's government, it's healthcare, it's other big sectors, defense. So, and the conversation I try to have with founders like that is, what's the insertion point? How are you going to get your first set of customers? And how at a very detailed level is that going to work? And then through that conversation, try to understand what it is they have in mind. I mean, maybe there is a reason why changing everything makes sense, and maybe they have a new approach to that. I'm open to that. I don't pretend to have all the answers, but if they don't, then we try to think with them about, okay, what types of approaches could work and who could they speak to that could help them figure that out.
As we wrap up here, last question for you. What are you most looking forward to at the Human X event this
Oh my
in
goodness,
March?
I am really, the thing about these events that I love is just the energy that comes from the participants, and the just creativity around the different things that people are trying. So the thing I'm looking forward to most is meeting people who imagine a future that's different from the past and are actually pouring their heart and soul into building something that they really believe in. And I would love to speak to people like that.
Yeah, I really, this is obviously going to be the first year for this event, and it seems like the energy is already very good for an event that's still several months out. So I'm excited for it. Look forward to meeting you there in person, which will be great. And yeah, wishing you all the best of luck. Let's definitely stay in touch. And thanks so much for coming on the podcast here today.
It's been a great pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.